We're sipping champagne in Las Gatas, California.
Sip, sip, hooray! Hi there, and welcome to Sip, Sip, Hooray, the podcast where we make wine fun, not stuffy, effervescent, not boring. And speaking of bubbles, that's our focus today. We are thrilled to be joined by the president of one of the world's oldest and best-loved champagne houses, Laurent-Perrier. Even better, it is also the largest family and female-run champagne house. You're going to love our conversation with Michelle DeFeo, so pop some bubbly and let's get this party started. We are two Marys who like to eat, drink, and be merry. I'm Mary Babbitt.
And I'm Mary Orlin, and, champagne is one of these wines that brings you pleasure. The French term is vin de plaisir. And so we are so pleased that, Michelle, that you are joining us today. And, it's exciting to talk to you about the House of Laurent-Perrier, the history, and you've had 3 centuries of women at the helm, which is, quite something to celebrate. And while champagne is for celebrations, we also want to talk about how perhaps you should be drinking a glass of Laurent-Perrier every day if you can, or something bubbly every day. So also, I'd like to note we are recording this on July 14th, Bastille Day. So it's a even greater pleasure to be talking French champagne. So, Michelle, welcome to Sip, Sip, Hooray.
Bonjour, Mary. It is my plaisir to be with you today to talk about these vins de plaisir, and certainly to be doing so, like you said, on Bastille Day, which it's amazing. Speaking about the history of Laurent-Perrier, the storming of the Bastille happened on July 14th, 1789, and it was only 23 years after that Laurent-Perrier was established.
Really?
So it puts it in good historical context for how long we have been doing this and the expertise that we have built up along the way.
Wow! And that was the year 1812.
That was in 1812. Yes, it's it was first founded by a cooper, and he had a cellar. A cooper was someone who made barrels. At that time, we were doing primary fermentation in barrels in champagne, and he of course had a cellar master who is making the wines. The cellar master's name was Eugène Laurent. And when the cooper died, he actually left the house to his cellar master. And then the cellar master died in 1887. And he actually died in a tragic accident in the cellars, but at least he died doing what he loved. Mm-hmm. But he left it to his widow, and her name was Mathilde Laurent-Perrier. And they were, of course, expecting her to, just kind of take a step back and let the men run the house. But instead, she took the bull by the horns, and she was very much in control. And she became our first woman at the helm of Champagne Laurent-Perrier. And when she died, she left it to her daughter. And then when her daughter died, it was sold to another family and a woman by the name of Marie-Louise Lanson de Nonancourt. And it is her granddaughters now, Alexandra and Stephanie, who are at the helm of their house, and her great daughter, Lucy, who is one of the daughters' who has also just joined our house. So it's this amazing history of family, of intergenerational leadership, of course, of female leadership. And for me personally, I have now worked with 3 generations of the family personally, which is a wonderful thing to be able to do. I feel like I'm kind of a guardian of the history of the house to make sure that I steward it in whatever way that I can, into its next century of existence.
So incredible, like the impact of all that history. And I just love the fact that there's such a strong line of women in charge. So tell me how you, as a Jersey girl, first of all, I love that you're fluent in French, obviously. We heard it off the top. But how did a Jersey girl end up, running this, being president of this famously wonderful and old French champagne house?
It's certainly not what really, who could even dream of running in a subsidiary of a champagne house, right? When they're young. But certainly for me, this was not something that I had ever aspired to. My family comes from a blue collar background, and I have 2 rocks on my desk right now, right in front of me. One of them is bright white. It is part of the soil, part of the chalk that comprises the Champagne vineyards. So I look at that to always remember where our wines come from. But then I have another rock, and it's a piece of anthracite coal, black with iridescent rainbows on it. And that reminds me of where I came from and where my family came from, which was the coal mining area of eastern Pennsylvania. Nice. So who would have thought that, when my great uncle gave me this big piece of coal, as it was one of my prized possessions, and it still is, that someone who came from that background would then have this beautiful white rock and would be espousing all the virtues of something as beautiful and historic as Champagne. But I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I had fallen in love with France because as I was watching television one night at my grandmother's house, waiting to write down the lottery numbers of all things, and which was my little task as like an 8 or 9-year-old. And as I was waiting for the grandma's numbers to be pulled, there was a little PSA on the television communicating about an exchange student program called AFS. And they had images on there saying, "Hey, apply to be an exchange student." And they had a photo of the Eiffel Tower. And I called my mom and I was like, "Mom, what is that? That's so pretty." She said, "Oh, that's the Eiffel Tower." I said, "Oh, can we go visit?" And at that time, no one in my family even had a passport. We had just immigrated fairly recently, right? But I decided that I wanted to go to France. So about 6 years later, I finally got to become an exchange student with AFS when I was 15. And that just started a lifelong love of all things French. So I graduated with a degree in French and thought maybe I wanted to translate, and realized that wasn't really the right thing for me. But I got a job just being bilingual, because I was bilingual. I got a job that I just applied to in the newspaper that just said bilingual administrative assistant needed. And lo and behold, it was at a large wine and champagne importing company.
Wow.
And that was 25 years ago. And since then I got bitten by the wine bug, and here I am.
So Michelle, I have to know, did your grandmother win any of those lotteries?
As a matter of fact, she once won $10,000.
Wow.
And I remember that one very well because she treated me. That was a lottery that was held by I believe the New York Post. And she had to come into New York City from New Jersey, which is where I grew up, and hold one of those giant checks for them to take her picture. So I got to go. That was as far as I recall, that was my very first trip to New York City. So that was so my grandmother's lottery lottery playing was very influential in my life, because that's when I fell in love in New York City. And now here I am in New York City as the president of a champagne importing company. So you never know how you're going to get there, right?
You never know. Well, and it sounds like, you hit the jackpot, monitoring those numbers.
Oh, nicely
Good
done,
one,
Mary
Mary.
Arlen.
Very good. Cheers to that. I hope you have a glass of Laurent-Perrier in front of you.
Sip,
I'm going
hooray.
to raise mine to you.
Yeah,
Yes.
sip, hooray to that.
Oh, that's funny.
Sip hooray to that for sure. So it's been a wonderful ride. And when so I had started working for another company, which will go unnamed. They're one of my competitors now, and they're successful enough that I don't need to say their name out loud. But I learned a huge amount. After that, I actually moved to California thinking maybe I want to make wine. And I landed in San Francisco, and I got a job at a wholesaler. And I was listening recently to your interview of Alan Viader.
Yes.
And I don't mind growing older, but it is interesting to me. I was thinking, I remember when his mother came in and talked to us, because I worked for the distributor that was selling Viader wines in the 90s. And, Alan was probably, I'm sure he wasn't of legal drinking age yet. He may have even still been in diapers. But I think about some of like the wonderful women like that. I remember when Delia Viader came into our meeting, and she's a small woman who is just filled with energy, who is incredibly smart. She's a PhD. She had this very audacious plan to establish this winery and use Slovenian oak, I believe it was. And which I assume they're still doing. I don't know that for sure. But I was very lucky, because I did have, over the course of my career, certain women that I was able to see and say, okay, there are women who do cool things in this business. Very few. But I remember them all very clearly. And now I think, 25 years later, there are more women in the business. And I'm very, very lucky to work for the largest female-run winery in Champagne. And that's become, something that I've worked very hard to do as well, is support other women in the industry and make this industry more diverse, because it is no longer just straight white men that drink wine. So,
No.
it's not, we're always doing ourselves a disservice to have had that be the largest representation of people in the industry. And I'm so glad to see certainly the rapidity of change, that the slope of the change has increased dramatically over the last, I would say, 5 years, even over the last 2 years, which is a wonderful thing to see now in this business.
Well, Michelle, I understand that you have participated in mentorship programs, one through the Batonage organization. And can you tell us about that? And also, who were your mentors, in addition to perhaps Delia?
So I actually never, I was certainly inspired by a number of people, but I never had the guts to ask somebody for help. So I certainly looked at many people from afar and admired them and tried to emulate them, but they probably would. Delia Viador would have absolutely no idea who I am. So I didn't necessarily have. I didn't have any mentors who were women. I would just watch from afar. It wasn't until I would say about maybe 10 years ago that I started asking for help, when I realized I was out of my depth because I was moving forward. So I would ask peers. I would be maybe in tasting groups with my peers. So they were all mentoring me. We were mentoring each other. But the idea of an actual mentor program, or asking someone, hey, can you spend some time with me and help me? It was never something that crossed my mind. I suppose because maybe I am kind of a fish out of water in this industry, or at least I perceive that I kind of always assumed that everyone knew more than I did. And this is very much something that this goes far beyond me, or far beyond the wine business. This is a well-documented phenomenon that women suffer from at a much higher proportion than men, which is called imposter syndrome.
Totally.
I can relate.
Me too.
Yes,
That's full
right?
on me. That is me. Yeah. I don't ask anybody, because that'll just show how dumb I am.
Exactly.
I'll just reveal my stupidity.
Right. Or, they'll say, they'll figure out I am an imposter, right?
Yeah.
Right. It's this terrible thing. And it really is prevalent with women, where I will very happily say, though, that I'm not seeing that with young women who are just entering their careers, which is some of the women that I'm mentoring, that they are asking. And I am thrilled to help. And I think, wow, I missed such an opportunity, but I was so afraid to look like I didn't know what I was doing. And whenever I would get a compliment, I would kind of shuttle it aside, and I would say, well, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It was never, I never had that confidence. And, it's only been, I would say, maybe in the last 5 years that I've really found my own voice. And now I'm like, okay, well, that was so dumb, right? It was just so dumb. And now I want to make sure that other women are comfortable raising their voices. So I did participate in the Batonage mentoring program. It was a very large program. I still have so much work that I need to do to circle back with those women and keep supporting them. But in addition to that, I also mentor the winners of we started a Women in Wine Leadership Scholarship program several years ago, in conjunction with one of our distributor partners called Winebow. So, some women like mentoring. They're not afraid to ask. Other women just, they want to just maybe observe. But I think that the women who are really engaged, and the ones that are calling me and getting in touch actively and saying, okay, look, I have this challenge. Here's what I just went through. What would you do? Or what do you think I should do? I can't tell you how good that feels when someone asks me that. I do not always know the answer, but certainly talking about it and directing them to where else can you go for this answer, or to get some help with this sticky situation. That's how we're going to change things in the business. It's not about, when I think about the kinds of things, and I talk to women who are of my age, who have been in this industry for a long time, and we often talk about what we put up with that we just assumed we had to, because that was just, if you were going to get ahead, you had to be one of the boys. And that is not the way that women are now, nor should it even be how other men are now. It shouldn't just be go along to get along. It should be, no, this is not right. This is not what I want to do. I'm not going to go to that strip club and see if you can drink me under the table.
Right.
20 something years ago, that was like, okay, this is what I have to do in order to kind of prove my mettle. And so I'm so glad now that, well, first of all, as a matter of, HR policy, people know that you can't do that anymore. That is no longer appropriate, which is good.
That's so good.
If someone's asked to do that, they have the voice to say, no, you know what, I'm not going to do that. And that's going to be okay. So it's positive changes.
Would you say there are ways in which you kind of feel a female leadership presence at Laurent-Perrier in ways that make you guys a little bit different than somebody else? Or is it just, is it gender neutrality where it's not about the fact that you guys are female, that it's, it's about making terrific champagne? But I just wonder, are there nuances? Are there ways in which you guys as Laurent-Perrier as a company is perhaps more sensitive or more in any way, I don't know, female?
That's a great question. And, when the line when we say the largest female and family owned house in Champagne, that is not something that comes from our house in France. That is something that I feel is important here in America and that we communicate, but they kind of shy away from that. Alexandra and Stephanie, who currently run the house, their father, Bernard, was at the helm for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And, they don't want to denigrate his accomplishments and his leadership. We owe him a tremendous debt to making Laurent-Perrier what it is now. So it's not something that we use as a marketing stance or anything. Mm-hmm. But I will say, though, that we're from this, in terms of working for the house in general from France, what I do feel is the family run part of it. For example, when the pandemic hit and some of our competitors immediately laid off large swaths of their workers, I went to to my boss. My boss, the CEO, the operational CEO, is also a man, and Alexandra and Stephanie are on the management board with him. And I pitched the fact that we have been doing so well in the U.S. and in order for us to continue to do well and do the right thing by our people, you need to keep everyone employed. And we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the sales are going to be, but keep us whole. We are a hardworking team. We've delivered for this company. It is not right for us to be laying people off. And they agreed. So we kept our team completely whole. Everyone was paid 100% of what they were being paid. And I have to say, I'm very, very proud of the fact that my team actually, we just got some data. We actually grew faster than any other champagne brand last year.
Wow.
In the U.S.
That's incredible.
Wow. And I credit that to obviously my team's extremely hard work. Obviously, they were grateful for still having jobs, but we actually grew in the middle of the pandemic, whereas a lot of our competitors failed because they just looked at the bottom line, looked at a short-term gain versus a long-term benefit, and that's not how our house ran. I will say that I did work with Bernard when he was at the helm as well. I think he would have done the same thing. He is one of his quotes that I think of all the time. He often used to say, with quality wine and quality people, you cannot fail.
Oh,
but you need those two things. So the house really believes in people.
That's
and
great.
Now I will say, though, interestingly, on the U.S. side, I certainly do. And again, this all came into very stark relief during the pandemic. We have a number of women who work for us on our sales team and in other roles, and some of whom have children, and disproportionately the responsibility for childcare and homeschooling fell on women, as we all know, during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And, it was breaking my heart reading about women who were kind of trying to, hide their children away, or were trying to just pretend that it wasn't an issue and not having the kids in the frame. And I said, look, we'll get through this. Bring the kids in, do what you got to do. We'll schedule things around when you need to be doing things for homeschooling. We will build this around your needs, because quality people, it's a nice thing to say. It's a hard thing to find, first of all. And of course, when you find quality people, which is who I'm very proud to have staffed my entire team with, when you have quality people, everyone else is trying to steal them from you all the time. So, so from my perspective, things that are quote unquote considered female, being, looking at good maternity leave policies, looking at supporting women or families in general, because we are not just workers, we are humans. Those are things that are considered female, right or wrong. But those are also things that are incredibly good for business. And that's, to me, that's just, this is the way that companies should be run. And interestingly, I've hired several younger people, millennial age people. I've been interviewing over the last year, all remote interviews for a couple of new positions. And we get asked that. And that's new. The younger generation, they're not afraid to ask, what is your maternity leave policy? I would never have asked that. I don't have children. It's never been in my life's plan to have children. So I would always find a way to work that into an interview to tell people I wasn't going to have children. And I think about what a terrible feminist I was to do that. Because it was, considered that if you asked, then it must be that, that's what you were planning, and therefore you were a less attractive candidate, which is terrible.
No, but you're exactly right. That's how it was.
It absolutely was.
So I absolutely love the guts of younger women now who are just saying, no, we're going to ask these things. They're also asking about things like corporate social responsibility, which I have been in my current position. I kind of, when I was in California and I thought I was going to maybe make wine, that I realized how hard that is and how many bugs are in the vineyards and how much chemistry is involved.
How many bugs?
Okay. Yeah,
but people don't realize that it's not this clean, pristine.
Gosh, the yellow jackets at harvest.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to spend time at a vineyard and realize it's not as glamorous as it looks.
Exactly.
No, it's farming. It's full on farming.
It is.
You get sticky fingers and everything gets sticky.
So that's why you weren't going to do
heavy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. Yeah. So I decided, sales, marketing on this side. After the wine is made, I'll do everything else after that point. And some people who I had been working with at my first champagne company back in New York were approached by Laurent-Perrier in 1998 to establish Laurent-Perrier's first U.S. subsidiary. And they called me and they said, hey, why don't you come join us? So I did, and I joined LP in 1998, and I stayed doing sales until 2002, and then left and worked for another wine and spirits company, did some consulting, got my MBA on a part-time basis while I was working full-time to try to get rid of some of that imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And just as a side note, I do not regret getting my MBA. I learned a tremendous amount, but the thing that I really learned is that no one has all the answers. That I thought I was going to go get that degree because I could then stop feeling like I had imposter syndrome. I did stop having it because that's only because I learned that nobody knows all the answers.
Oh, Michelle, that's so helpful to hear from. It is. I mean, and for our listeners, for me, for our listeners, that is so helpful to hear someone in your position say something like that, because we just assume you do.
Right.
And like there's this place at which you get to where, oh, now I know the answers,
Well, it's tremendous pressure we put on ourselves. And it's a relief to hear, Michelle, you say this. And I hope it resonates, not just, Mary, with you and me, but with our listeners too.
And it's certainly this past year and a half now, I almost, who could ever have known what the answers were? Who would have known what to do in this last year and a half? And I think having that open mind, it was actually very liberating in some ways to just say, okay, I am now officially allowed to not know any of the answers. I can think about what do I think is the best way to go, but we have no idea if it's the right thing to do or not. So, and I credit that with, that openness of me and my whole team, really just saying, okay, we don't really know what to do. So let's listen. Let's ask questions. That I did learn in school. I learned some of the right questions to ask, and I learned to not be afraid to ask questions or ask for help, and just asking our accounts, asking our clients, asking our distributors, what's going on out there? What do you think we should do? What are, and that really led to that kind of openness, I think, leads to innovation. It leads to new ideas, even with a house that's been around for over 200 years, in our third 100-year span that we're now entering. We should not pretend like what we did here is going to get us there. Asking those questions is a great thing. And I love that there is more openness, and I love creating a culture where that's allowed. And I also love creating a culture when people ask me what the answer is or what they should do, and I say, I don't know. It's very free. Let me think about it. Let's talk about it. What do you think? What other information do we need? It really is a very different way to approach business, and in that way, I think that, and maybe that's a female thing, kind of going back to your other question, but it's also a cultural thing. I would hope it's not limited to that, but I think there is a humility that has been, having been going for so long, pretending that I was supposed to know all the answers, and that it was easier for me to be humble. Whereas there's a lot of people, and certainly a lot of males in power, where the worst possible thing in the world for them would be to show a weakness.
Right.
And it's not every man, but I think it is more common in men. And I think that being able to say you don't know something and being able to show a weakness, if that's a feminine trait, that is what's helped us grow and helped us serve our customers better.
Well, sip, sip, hooray to that.
Totally.
That
Love
needs
that.
a big cheers.
I'll drink to that. Sip,
Let's
sip,
drink
hooray
to
to that.
that.
Indeed.
Okay, we're drinking to that one.
So, Michelle, you mentioned a quote from Bernard earlier today, and as you probably know, there's so many great quotes associated with champagne out there from Marilyn Monroe, Winston Churchill, and all. And I'm wondering, what are some of your favorite champagne quotes?
Well, there's one actually by John Maynard Keynes, and he was an economist. Which, champagne. Look, it's not an inexpensive beverage. Of course, it is an indulgence. It is a luxury, and believe me, if we could make it less expensively, we would. But we cannot because of the quality demands and the price of grapes, etc. But even an economist who you would think would be penny pinching and making sure that he's very careful with his money, when he was on his deathbed, he was asked if he had any regrets. And he answered that his only regret in life was that he did not drink more champagne. And okay, that's, I am certainly not at any risk of regretting that. I make sure that I integrate it as often as possible. And that really kind of goes into this idea, not obviously that sounds very self-serving, right? The more people want to drink champagne, the more of it we will be able to make and sell to them. But to me, when I think about champagne and what I love about champagne and why I came back to champagne after leaving and working with still wines and even working with spirits, and I had this one point in my career where I was actually weighing two really great job offers. One was coming back to LP and one was working with a wonderful, historic, high quality spirit. And I struggled and I thought, I struggled because on the one hand, the one offer was maybe more pragmatically the one I should go for, but then the other one was champagne. And I thought, champagne is so special. I am not one of these people who could sell ice to Eskimos. I think it's unethical. I have no interest in just selling something for the sake of selling it. I truly love champagne and I truly love Laurent-Perrier. And what I love so much about champagne in general is that it's not just a beverage. It's something that it's a glass of emotion. We have this connection with champagne and celebration. And I am a bit of an iconoclast in the industry where, oftentimes I will get asked, how do we get people to drink champagne beyond celebrations? And I say, don't. Is it a great food pairing wine? Sure, it's a great food pairing wine. One of my favorite food pairings was Laurent-Perrier Rosé with a duck breast and a Bing cherry reduction. Glaze was a reduction. And I was like, it was mind blowing. You know what else would have gone with that? Various Pinot Noirs, possibly even a Syrah, Côte Rôtie would have worked. There's other things there that would also work. It's a food pairing. But what else have you ever experienced when you just have a glass of a liquid in your hand and you take a sip and it changes your mentality, it changes your feeling? Champagne is celebration. What we need to do is celebrate more, not disconnect champagne from celebration. And celebrating can mean, we're seeing it right now, not just Laurent-Perrier, but the champagne market in the U.S. is through the roof. People are celebrating the end of lockdown. We're celebrating being back with our families and our friends. We're celebrating being able to go out to eat again. Think of all of the things that we can celebrate, that we should say, you know what, we deserve to celebrate. Sometimes celebrating it's been the end of a terrible week, but it's over. Let's celebrate that. Let's take a moment and do nothing other than celebrate the fact that we've survived, we've learned, and we're going to toast ourselves. We're going to say sip, sip, hooray with a glass of champagne.
We agree with that.
Do that with a beer.
I think we took so much for granted before the pandemic, and now we, to kind of go back to your quote. I mean, what do you regret? You regret not celebrating more, so not noticing the moments and making them special. So I love that's a perfect excuse to drink champagne at any time. Hey, I have to ask you, speaking of the name champagne, do you want to weigh in on the Russian controversy about the name, or do you can choose to stay out of it, but I just wondered if you had an opinion on that, because it's a really it's not, to be called champagne, for our listeners who don't know, you have to be produced in Champagne, France. So tell us why that's important and why it's a name worth protecting.
That is a great question. I'm going to diplomatically sidestep the Russia question
Okay.
so as to not create an international incident. No,
Which we often do on this show, you know.
I'm sure. I know. I can't risk it. It's too high stakes. Now, so the whole idea, though, is really the idea of the word champagne written in, well, let's say written in French. It's the same word in French and in English, right? In the regular alphabet that we are used to seeing, as opposed to in Cyrillic. But that word champagne, and even with leaving Russia to the side, let's just look at it domestically. Let's look at California. There are still sparkling wines in California that use the word champagne.
Right.
And this is, there is an international agreement, but there are certain brands that are grandfathered in because they were already using this word.
Exactly.
So the word champagne for many years in the past was synonymous with any wine that had bubbles in it, in this very same way that a Kleenex is synonymous with a tissue.
A tissue, yeah.
Right. And it's not it's a Kleenex, not just a tissue. And anyone who has used a terrible generic brand of tissue when they were sick knows that your nose will be red and scruffy and raw by the end of that cold, as opposed to using something that's high quality, like a true Kleenex. But with champagne, obviously, it goes a lot further. It is not just a brand name. It is the name of a place. In the same way that there are Maine lobsters or Napa Cabernets or New York cheesecake. These are all things that, they come from certain places. And further to that, it's not just because we grow the grapes in an area of Champagne. It's kind of funny, actually, when you there's actually a train that goes from Charles de Gaulle Airport directly to Champagne. And so sometimes when I go to France for work, that is what my travel looks like. I get off of the plane at Charles de Gaulle. Now, of course, I love going into Paris, spending some time in Paris before I head out to Champagne. But sometimes I have to go right to work. So I get off the train, I go to the train station in the airport. You look up at that giant board that has all the destinations of the trains. And I love that board. The trains go to Zurich and Milan and Rome and Prague and, everywhere. And then there's one that it just says the destination is Champagne.
Yay.
Love it.
Champagne-Ardenne. I'm literally going to a place called Champagne. It is a place. It is a region of France. So in that region, even within that region, there is a huge set of rules and regulations that are essentially laws that even if you're growing a grape in Champagne, you have to do things in a very specific way in order to earn the right to put that place name on the label. For example, every grape needs to be hand-picked. There is no mechanical harvesting in Champagne. It has to be aged in the bottle on lees for a certain amount of time. There are just pages and pages of these regulations, and it has to bubble. And unless someone who is making wine in Champagne follows all of those rules and regulations to a T, they do not legally have the right to put the word champagne on the label. So when I mentioned before, champagne is expensive, all of those rules and regulations are part of that reason. We can only press our grapes so hard legally because we want to make sure that we maintain quality so that when someone sees the name champagne on a bottle, it means something. Not just where it's from, but all of the things that we had to do in order to earn the right to use that name that make it an indicator of quality in addition to geography. So it's a very important thing that we protect that. And when there is one brand in California that does a huge amount of volume and they sell for about $10 a bottle and they insist on using California champagne.
Yes.
And it's they're using that word as if it were a generic word that just meant wine that bubbles. Yeah. And and that's okay. I don't think anyone's going to confuse that with real champagne. Obviously the price point and then obviously the quality. And interestingly, someone that I work with in our office here in New York went to a former Soviet Socialist Republic. I want to say, where was it? I think he went to Tajikistan. I can't even remember. He travels a lot. But he came back from his trip and he brought us a bottle of the Soviet champagne, like the exact one that you're seeing in all of these articles now about what's going on with Russia, saying that you cannot put the word champagne in Cyrillic on a bottle because they have their own version of that. So he brought back a bottle and we opened it and we tasted it. And let's just say there's no way that anyone is going to confuse that $5 bottle of what we drank that day for being anything that is anything like the product that we are selling. So it was potable, but it tasted like apple cider. It was a very different product. So,
Sure,
but we want to protect that.
And there are producers in California who make fruit or nut wines, sparkling fruit or nut wines that they call almond champagne or something like that.
Yeah. And, and I think it's doing a disservice to their own quality too.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I mean, I will say the brand I was mentioning earlier is Korbel. And I have a lot of respect for Gary Heck and what he has built out of Korbel. And they even make a red sparkler, which is really quite good. And for that price point, they make lovely wines. Own that. And plus, California is its own wonderful brand. Sonoma, if it's all coming from Sonoma, if there's an AVA that it's coming from in California, be proud of that. There's no, I think that it's a little outdated, but I think that it's something that we continuously need to work towards, is only having people understanding that if it says champagne on the label, then it comes from France, and there's only a few holdouts on that. But
Sure.
And I think consumers are much more interested in knowledge, about where things come from now.
Absolutely. So, they want to know where those grapes were grown, who made it, how it was made. And they also want to know more and more, how are you treating the workers? What are you spraying in the vineyards? The whole sustainability aspect is becoming something that more and more consumers are demanding to know, which I think is a great thing.
It is. And I love that you brought that up, because this is, one of the, I've already spoken about some of the wonderful things about working for a family run company that has this very long history. And then there also maybe are some challenges with that. And one of them was trying to get lots of information about, hey, are we using pesticides? Or what are we doing in the vineyards? And, what are we, asking these like really in-depth questions that were never asked before. We've had the same chef de cave since he's began working for us in 1973. We have only had 3 chef de caves, 3 chief winemakers since the end of World War II. And our current chef de cave has been in his position since 2004 and with us since 1973. So when we started asking these questions, he's like, why do you need to know that? His job he's not a marketer. He's not a salesperson. He makes the wine. He's underground a lot of his life, making our wonderful wines. So we're like, no, we want to know this. And when he started telling us these things, I was like, oh my gosh, why aren't we screaming this from the mountaintops? We stopped using pesticides a long time ago. We had sustainable wine growing techniques in our own vineyards and with all of our growers. We've been doing that for years. And it wasn't even until I asked that I learned that we have 2 sustainable agriculture certificates by 2 rigorous programs. One's called the HVE certificate. The other one is the VDC certificate, which is only held by about 15% of all vineyards in Champagne. HVE is even less. And what I'm like, why aren't we communicating about this? They're like, well, we're doing this stuff because it's good for the earth. We're not doing about this stuff to market it like that. I'm like, no, but come on, but we can do both. We can do both. It's okay. When we also we do this cool thing, and I love saying this, it's so fun. When we stopped doing pesticide use, what we started doing was pheromone mating interruption with bugs. So we have these little packets of pheromones in the vineyards, and these little biodegradable packets that we put at the end of the row of the vines, and it basically sends out this pheromone so that the bugs don't know what other bugs to mate with. And the French have this great term for it. They call it confusion sexuelle. And it's like, come on, I want to talk about that whenever I get the chance. I mean, what a cool,
exactly
to talk about insect mating, it's fun stuff. And, there's all these things that we're doing. And another thing that, that I should say that 40% of Laurent-Perrier is actually publicly traded in France. And when we went public to remain independent and to remain family run, we needed capital. So we went public with part of our winery, and the initial IPO was directed towards our growers from whom we buy grapes, right? So those growers now are owners of Laurent-Perrier,
that's cool.
Which is a really cool thing.
That's
and
really
no one else in
neat.
Champagne has done that. So we have this big report that we have to publish every year, just, for regulations. And I read through it. It's about 200 pages long. And several years ago, I was reading through it, and it said that that we were, even longer than that, we were working towards a 0 landfill policy. And again, this is something that I only know because I was reading this document. And we achieved that about 3 years ago, that not a single thing that we do in any of our winemaking results in anything going to landfill. everything gets repurposed or everything gets recycled. We sell our grape skins to cosmetic companies. We have our own wastewater treatment facility, and
No way. That's incredible. Zero
and
landfill.
as that zero landfill, we had this as a goal, and I kept saying we need to talk about this. This is really cool, and they're like, we're talking about. Don't talk about garbage. Talk about our champagne. Yeah,
but Michelle,
hand in hand.
It just goes to show what happens when you ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Wow, Mary, nice sip hooray to that. You're absolutely right.
Time to drink again.
Another exactly. I didn't know this was going to be a drinking game, but hey, why not?
I approach everything in life like that. I don't know. Everything in life should be a drinking game, at least if it's champagne. No. But all of these things that it's these wonderful things, and now we are starting to communicate about it because we are seeing that people are interested in it, and that is part of the quality story. It is part of the way that we act in our winery is very much reflected in the quality of our wines and our longer aging in everything that we do. So. And it's just such a wonderful thing to be able to be so proud of the product, not just because of what it tastes like, but because of everything that we did to actually make it.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of questions, I have a couple more. One of my questions is, how often are you in Champagne, and what do you like to do when you're not working there? And also, what do you do when you're not working here?
Well, world's smallest violin. I'm very sad to say I have not been in Champagne since the beginning of the pandemic, even though now I can go. So it's getting to that point. But I'm usually there about 2 or 3 times a year. Mm-hmm. And I absolutely love it. I either go with clients or I go for meetings, or I just go to be there and experience Champagne at different times of the year. And I just realized that my passport is set to expire, because I haven't pulled that. I would normally be traveling. In the year before the pandemic, I was on 44 planes. I kind of like to count them, right? Yeah. And I haven't been on one since March 15th of 2020. I flew back from Puerto Rico actually, and that right as we went into lockdown. But I loved kind of flipping through, so I haven't pulled out my passport in a while, and I just realized it's almost going to expire in a few months. Wow, and I love flipping through and seeing all like the Roissy and the Charles de Gaulle entries. I do get to indulge my love of being in France and being in Champagne. And when I'm there, Laurent-Perrier is not open to the public. You can't just kind of drive up and ask for a visit. However, listeners of Sip Hooray have an in. So if they want to contact you or send you a message and then send me a message, we do organize visits on a one-on-one private bespoke basis. We're not just an industrial, come and see what we do. We literally will have someone say, if you really care enough to come visit, we have someone who can walk you around and you can have a meaningful visit, not just an intern regurgitating what they've just memorized, about the house. We have real people who will talk to people who care about Champagne and would like to learn about Laurent-Perrier.
Well, thank you, Michelle. That is a very generous offer. I know I'll be taking you up on that next time I'm in Champagne. I was in Champagne on March 1st, 2020.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So probably one of the last Americans in Champagne for some time.
You were there more recently than I was. I haven't been there since October of 2019. And I love being there for so many reasons. I mean, obviously being in Champagne, looking at the vines, their stage of growth, what's going on in the vineyards, seeing what's going on in the winery. But then there's also the city of Reims, R-E-I-M-S, is a beautiful city. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site with an absolutely gorgeous cathedral.
Yes.
So much history. There's also some people are not aware of this, that the original truce, the surrender agreement for World War II, was actually signed right behind the train station in Reims.
I didn't know that.
At a high school. Yeah, so there's a tiny little museum there. It's the size of one classroom, and it's called the Museum of the Surrender, or the Musée de la Reddition. And you can actually see where that original document was signed. It wasn't enough of a photo op, so they ended up redoing it in a train car, which most people are familiar with, but the original one was actually signed in Reims. But Reims was actually founded by the Romans, the Gallo-Romans. It has a 2,000-year history. And there's still the forum where they did their commerce still exists, and there's an arch that is still there. So you can go see 2,000 years worth of history when you visit Reims. So there's
cool.
wonderful culture and wonderful heritage there. But one of the things that I'd like to do when I'm there, because obviously if you're going to go there, there are wonderful restaurants. There's a lot of champagne to be enjoyed. There's a lot of wonderful food. Sometimes maybe if you want to do something that's a little different, or you need to maybe get a little bit of exercise, but you want to do it,
Right.
in a way that's fun. There's this super cool, I don't know if it's a national park or a state park, but it's called the Faux de Verzy, Fauxdeverzy. Verzy is a Grand Cru vineyard on the Montagne de Reims, which is one of the main growing areas of Champagne. But there is a forest there that has these beautiful trails and these gnarled trees that have been kind of influenced by the winds of the area. And they are these absolutely sculptural old trees that look like, it looks like you're in like a fairy tale forest. And it's a wonderful place to go for a little, not a lot of people know about it. You'll almost certainly be the only people there. You can always, of course, pack a little picnic with a few bottles of champagne in your bag. And there's some wonderful places to sit and enjoy in this forest on this mountain. Well, we call it a mountain, but it's kind of like a high hill. But it's a beautiful place that not a lot of people know about.
What a great tip. I love that. Thank you for that. So what about in the States? What do you do for fun when you're not working in the U.S.?
Well, certainly the past year and a half has been a little light on that stuff. Like I said, I do travel a lot, and I love I tack on a day or two either before or after my business to just see whatever the city is that I'm going to experience it. But actually just in the last, I'm very proud of my career and what I've accomplished, but I've always had something nagging at me that I've always kind of assuaged my conscience in terms of like philanthropy or volunteering by just donating money and figuring, okay, well, I've given money. But a little over a year ago, in the aftermath of everything that happened after George Floyd was murdered, I thought I need to do something more. I need to do something. I need to do something. I need to make a difference. And part of what I did was I established our first corporate social responsibility program. And as one element of that program, we gave everyone in our company 72 hours of additional paid time off to use for volunteering for whatever organization that they chose. And I thought, well, I need to walk the walk here, right? I have to lead by example. So I looked into various organizations and decided that I wanted to volunteer with the Girl Scouts, and specifically with a troop of the Girl Scouts here in New York called Troop 6000, which is for homeless girls in the New York City shelter system.
Oh, wow.
And I was never a Girl Scout. I kind of always wanted to be, but it never happened.
I was a Girl Scout.
I was too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a first class Girl Scout. That means you stuck with it forever, like till high school.
I was a brownie, and what was the next one? Cadet after that, the next level. But yeah, and my mom was my Girl Scout troop leader one year.
Yeah, it's good times.
Fantastic.
Yeah, Troop 499.
I love it.
Troop 6000, and they're homeless girls.
Yes, they're girls who are in that system, and of course, Girl Scout. I didn't really know what it was. I knew about the cookies, but what I didn't know, even for example, about the cookies, is that along the whole range, you've got little brownies, the little girls, right? You're teaching them how to count change, and then for the juniors, for like the older Girl Scouts in high school, I specifically looked at the program and it said that they learn how to do P&Ls, profit and loss statements.
Oh, wow.
But,
no way.
That's cool. So this whole thing is about it's empowering girls and young women and learning skills. And then also in Troop 6000, the mothers are invited to be in the meetings with us, so they also learn these skills. And I mean, I do P&Ls all day long, and I thought, well, that I can do. So that's been really that's been taking up any of my available time, and I actually just got back from camp on Sunday for the first time, my first time ever at Girl Scout camp.
You went to camp.
I went to camp. We did the songs.
All right.
I learned how to read a compass,
fun.
and read a fire, and we did all of this amazing stuff. And I kind of realized that I must be doing it wrong, because volunteering is supposed to be about giving back, but I'm getting a whole lot more than I'm giving. So I've got to. I guess I'm doing it wrong, but so that's been something that I've been trying to, it's something that instead of just like complaining about the way that the world is, I'm looking to find kind of ways to fix it in ways that I think will be helpful. And this has just been an amazing experience that I could not have imagined in my wildest dreams how much I would love it.
Oh,
I
good
think
for
we need
you.
another toast to that.
Yeah, right. Cheers
We're
to
going to need
that.
another bottle.
I know. Speaking of the bottles, we can't let you get away without talking about the champagne and these beautiful wines. And for our listeners out there, hopefully you'll be salivating after you hear us talk about them, but they're just beautiful, beautiful wines. So, let's start with the Brut, which is something everyone may be familiar with. The Brut style is a drier style of wine.
And
Yes.
delicious.
So it's we're not supposed to have favorite children within our portfolio, but I have to admit that our Brut non-vintage, which is our most accessible, least expensive wine, is really what I kind of gravitate towards most. It is so easy drinking. It is so delicious. It is called La Cuvée, Laurent-Perrier La Cuvée, Brut non-vintage, and it's predominantly Chardonnay, which is unusual because Chardonnay is the least planted and most expensive grape in Champagne. So usually you'll have a lot of Pinot Meunier in a non-vintage blend from other brands, but we focus on the Chardonnay because we want it to be light and refreshing and easy drinking. But it's also complex. It has 4 years of aging at a minimum. The legal minimum in Champagne is 1 year of aging. I was mentioning those regulations. And we have 4 years because that's where you get that biscuitiness, that complexity.
Yes.
So it's like, it is what Champagne to me is supposed to taste like. And it's available in these tiny little single serving bottles called splits or 187s. Good little roadies, I have to say.
Yeah.
Roadies, yes.
Also, which I have to admit, during the pandemic, that was one of my, people talked about walktails. That was my walktail, was taking a walk with my tiny little bottle of Laurent-Perrier La Cuvée. And then we also have half bottles. So if you're the only one who's drinking champagne for the evening and whoever you're with is drinking something else, it's a great way to just enjoy champagne, on your own. Perfect. The half bottles are a perfect size for a bubble bath. So I highly recommend it.
It's
Good
delicious.
tip. Good
I
tip.
had some just last night and absolutely loved it.
Now, what we are most known for, however, is our rosé. So the Laurent-Perrier, I know that we're just talking here, but if I can try to conjure up in people's minds, if they think about ever seeing a bottle of pink champagne and it's got this beautiful kind of squat shape, bulbous on the bottom with a short neck, and this glass crest emblazoned on the front and a round pink label, that's Laurent-Perrier Rosé. And that is our icon. That is what we are most known for. We started making that champagne in 1968. So we were kind of at the forefront. We are the forefront of the non-vintage rosé category in Champagne. So I know now everyone, and I love it, right? Everyone now is rosé all day. And I've been asked, the recent trend in rosé champagnes, it's kind of like when you ask someone who's been a struggling artist or actor for a long time, you're an overnight success. They're like, yes, I started 20 years ago, and then it just took overnight for you to hear about me. And that's kind of where we are with LP Rosé. But LP Rosé was the standard bearer. We remain the standard bearer. For quite some time, we were the largest rosé champagne in the world. But frankly, we established people's desire for this. People had rosé champagne and they loved it. And then competitors started joining this segment, and they can make a lot more of it than we can because we're too quality focused. We can't make more of it. Ours is 100% Pinot Noir. It's made only from grapes that are coming from vineyards that are designated at the 100% quality rating in Champagne, which is called Grand Cru. So it's limited in what we can make of it.
And the way you make it is very different from the way most other champagne houses make their rosés. Usually they blend a white still wine and a red still wine, but you don't do that. You do something else.
That's called the cheating method. No. That method is called the assemblage method. And yes, that is, to us, that's kind of like, you make a red wine, you make a white wine, you blend them together. And what you're going to get is something where, yes, you're achieving the right color, but it's like kind of a little bit like adding food coloring. You're not going to get like the full expression of that red fruit. So what we do is we actually make it, again, out of 100% Pinot Noir, and we use what's called the maceration technique. So we just let the grapes sit in a tank at a cold temperature, so no fermentation occurs. The juice sits with the grape skins for about 2 to 3 days, and that's where it pulls all of its aromatic intensity and aromatic freshness and its color. And that's all we do. It sounds simple, right? We crush the grapes and then we just let them sit there for 3 days. But that is very unusual, and it's very difficult because there's a little law in Champagne that says you're not allowed to make a red champagne. So we have to be very careful that we don't let them sit for too long.
Too long, yeah.
Because then it's kind of like, well, what does red champagne mean? It's kind of like Congress's old definition of obscenity. Well, we'll know it when we see it. Well, if you've already kind of macerated all of your Pinot Noir, you can't just dump it down the drain if someone says it's too red. So we have to be very careful. But we get that perfect, hand-picked, destemmed, berries only, sitting in a tank for 2 to 3 days. And what you get from that is just amazing Pinot Noir varietal characteristic. You get all these bright fruit aromas of strawberries and raspberries, but it's a dry wine. Yes, it's pink, but it's dry. There's no sugar in it.
Yeah.
Right. It's extra sugar.
Thank goodness.
I love the color. It reminds me of blood orange. And I also get some blood orange aroma and flavor in addition to the berry flavors you were talking about.
Absolutely. Mary, I love you've got a great nose. That is definitely
thank you.
something that I find in our rosé, that freshness, right? The vibrancy that you would get in a blood orange. You don't get that acidity, that you would expect from, and I sometimes get a ruby red grapefruit in a blood orange, but it doesn't have that acidity. It's very balanced as well, but you get that vibrant citrusy and red berry aromas. And as I mentioned, with that food pairing, just because it has all of those intense fruit aromas, it's still something that it matches with salmon like crazy. Like smoked salmon and the rosé is an absolutely phenomenal pairing.
Yum.
Actually even Thai food and our rosé, it's just, I've been doing a lot of takeout. So yes, even pizza with our rosé.
Well, pizza with anything in my book,
nice.
But it is gorgeous. I love the rosé.
And then the third wine you sent us is something that's, you guys were doing it before it really became on trend, but it's what we call zero dosage, and what you're calling it is a brut nature.
Yes. So this is another example of how we are a house that is very focused on quality and maybe don't excel as much at marketing, right? But this is actually what I'm enjoying right now. All my sip hoorays I am enjoying with Laurent-Perrier Blanc de Blanc Brut Nature non-vintage.
Me too.
Oh, fantastic! This is so a Blanc de Blanc. This is the House of Laurent-Perrier, the group Laurent-Perrier. We own several other champagne houses. That's all we do. All we do is make champagne, but we also make a champagne called Salon, which is, we own them, and it's the same Chef de Cave that makes Salon. And Salon is considered the absolute best Blanc de Blanc in the world for champagne, period. Very expensive, very, very limited production. So we have this know-how, this knowledge since the 1980s. We have owned Salon. And then in addition to that, we also have been making since 1981. In 1981, we released a Brut Nature. This was a new category of champagne that referred to the amount of sugar that was added. And basically, it's no sugar added. In champagne, we can add sugar up to 3 times during the winemaking process. And in our Brut Nature, we add none. We only use the sugars that are present in the grapes naturally at the time that they are harvested. That is extremely rare. So we released this wine in 1981 called Ultra Brut, which was a Brut Nature. And we released that based on the information that was learned by Bernard de Nonancourt, who was at the helm of the company at that time, when he looked back into Laurent-Perrier's history in the 19th century, when we were making a wine with no sugar added, which at the time was called the Grand Vin sans sucre. We had stopped making it over 100 years ago, but he wanted to bring out something new to add to the Laurent-Perrier range, but not new for the sake of being new. Everything is respectful of the heritage of Laurent-Perrier and of champagne. But there was no category for this type of champagne. So he created it along with the regulatory agencies in Champagne, and it was called Brut Nature. Again, his name was Bernard de Nonancourt, BN, and Brut Nature, also BN.
Yes.
I think he may have put a little Easter egg in there for us.
Yes.
So we were making that since 1981, and the hard thing in champagne, sugar is a function of how much sunlight the grapes get, right? To put it to simplify it. And Champagne used to be the northernmost growing region in the world for grapes. As the climate has warmed, we're seeing lots of sparklers in England now, right? Things are warmer in Champagne. It
Right.
used to be very, very difficult to make a Brut Nature because we couldn't add sugar. But as it became easier, other companies and other brands also started making a Brut Nature. So now you will see that designation on multiple brands, but it was only Laurent-Perrier who was making that in the 19th century. And then in 1981, when we released our Ultra Brut Nature, which is a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And we love Chardonnay. As I mentioned, it's the predominant grape in our La Cuvée, our non-vintage blend. And we actually were just doing some tests. We were able to acquire some new Chardonnay vineyards in the early 2000s. And we tested doing a Blanc de Blanc that was 100% Chardonnay that also had no sugar added. This is, and it has to be balanced. It can't be super acidic. It has to be just perfect. Everything has to be lined up in order for the wine to work. And we did, and we finally figured it out, and we released it in 2019. So it's very limited production. So it's special order. If you probably won't find it at your local wine shop, but you can always ask them, and they can get some of the allocation that we have given to the markets. It's a wonderful wine. It's also in these post-pandemic times. If anyone else has put on the quarantine 15 and then some change, it has
guilty.
Yeah, it happens to the best of us. But it has about a third fewer calories as any other champagne because there is no sugar in it. So,
and does that mean
wonderfully clean?
I'm sorry. Does it mean the alcohol level is a little bit lower too?
No, the alcohol level is the same. All of our alcohol levels are about 12%.
Okay.
But we haven't. That'll just be like the natural level. But there's no residual sugar, and almost all champagnes have some level of residual sugar in them, and that'll contribute to the slightly higher calorie count.
Well, we can't say it enough. The champagnes are so darn delicious, and they're easy to drink. They're so beautifully balanced, and they don't hit you with that super sweet bomb, and golly, they're just gorgeous.
So glad you love them.
Yes. Michelle, what's your most memorable bottle of champagne?
Oh, wow. Well, obviously I'm very privileged in that there have been many. But I would say there are two, and in reverse chronological order, I will give you a little insight into what it's like to work in sales for a champagne company or a wine company. You get samples. And obviously, we all use our samples to sell our wines with our customers. But, you also maybe take a bottle or 2 or 10 and you put it in your cellar and you kind of develop, your own little cellar because, that's just someplace that some of these sample bottles go.
Right.
So when I worked for Laurent-Perrier the first time, I was lucky enough to have some extra sample bottles hanging around by the time that I had left the job then. And I had been enjoying them for about 10 years. And I literally had one bottle left of our prestige cuvée, which is called Grand Siècle. And this is across 2 cross-country moves and a marriage and a divorce and, but I had this one bottle left and I just kept saving it for something and I didn't really know what. And I ended up finally opening it on the day that I was offered the position to move to the day that I accepted the position to come back as president of Laurent-Perrier U.S. And at the time I was living in this tiny little shoebox, kind of like a half a shoebox of an apartment in New York City on the 38th floor with the most amazing view. There was no room, but the view made up for it. And it had this tiny little balcony. And I popped that cork on the balcony of this little studio with this beautiful view of New York when I was offered this position. And I can't imagine a bottle of champagne tasting any better.
Oh, what a great story. I love that.
And then I will say that the one before that, the first bottle of liquor that my parents had a New Year's Eve party and they were not drinkers when I was young. Uh-huh. And when I was maybe a sophomore in high school, I stole a bottle. One of my friends was like, oh, take that bottle of champagne. You don't need a corkscrew. I guess her family drank wine. Mine did not. So we took our folk guitars and ran into the woods and we stole this bottle of champagne and we sang our guitars. And I remember drinking this bottle and looking up and seeing the trees spinning above my head. And then I used it as a candle holder for years after that, right? Went to college, became a goth, melted all these candles on it.
So cool.
And not that long ago, maybe about 10 years ago, I was like, I wonder what this is under here. At this point, it's just a giant mound of wax, right? So I chipped off all of the stuff that I had, stolen from my parents at some point in the late 80s. And it was a bottle of Dom Perignon 1982.
Really?
What?
I thought, wow. It was destiny, right? I mean, it
Wow.
was just, my palate was primed. I was just ready. That's right. I started drinking even as a small time thief out of my parents' wine cellar.
Started with the good stuff.
Did you get found out for taking that bottle?
No, never. No, my parents, I was like, God, I think there were more bottles. Whatever happened to them? They, I asked my mom. She was like, they got dusty. We probably threw them out. I'm like, oh God.
That's incredible.
Again, not coming from a wine drinking household. I don't know where they ended up, but they were probably in a recycling bin somewhere. So.
Well, at least you rescued one and enjoyed it.
Exactly.
Indeed. So it was very kind of prophetic. There's no way that I could have known that, and it was like, wow, that's when you start there. I mean, it's a wonderful wine, and I guess that just kind of primed my palate for excellent wines. So now here I am at Laurent-Perrier.
Hey, Michelle, we have a couple listener questions I want to run by you real quickly.
Oh, okay.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can do this. This is the first one.
Hi, my name's Maggie from Alviso, and I really like some bubbly. And I'm kind of curious to know who's the quintessential Laurent-Perrier customer? Who drinks this?
I love that question.
Did you get that? You did? Okay, good.
I did. Yeah. So the Laurent-Perrier customer, I was mentioning before, like how much we grew and how great we're doing, but we will never be one of the biggest brands. We do not have the grapes for it. We cannot have that kind of quality level. So we're the fourth largest brand in the U.S. The highest that we will ever be is the third largest, because we can't even touch the brands that are at number one and number two, because again, we're too quality focused, and you can't make the quality wines that we make at that quantity. So those other brands that are the largest are the ones that, certainly they're large for a reason. They're lifestyle brands. They're kind of in some ways, they are brands that are sold based on the perception of a lifestyle as opposed to the quality. So, that is not something that we can ever do. So the Laurent-Perrier customer and consumer is someone who doesn't care about having what everybody else has, that isn't concerned about just buying something because it's what they're expected to buy, or a brand that they're expected to wear. It's someone that really acknowledges quality and it matters to them. And that doesn't mean that they need to know anything about champagne. All they need to know, I don't know anything about leather making, right, or crafting a handbag. I know that Hermes makes incredible handbags, right? That is, obviously I'm not saying that everyone is an LP consumer is an Hermes consumer. I am not myself. I do not have an Hermes handbag. But Hermes can never make the kind of handbags that, let's say, a Louis Vuitton can make, right? They're like the largest brand. We're not a Louis Vuitton necessarily customer. We are the person who at least would love to have, if they could afford it, right, an Hermes handbag, because of that respect for the craftsmanship and the quality that's involved. So someone who's not just going with the flow. And also I use Hermes also because they are family run. And so there's people who care about a dedication to quality. And honestly, you don't need to know a darn thing about champagne. You just need to taste it. And if it tastes good, you can taste that quality. Those are the people that we would love to have as our consumers. And those are the people too, the buyers in restaurants, the buyers in stores. That's why they support Laurent-Perrier. That's why they feel confident when they get behind it and they recommend it to their customers. It's because the quality is there. So people for whom quality matters, those are Laurent-Perrier customers.
Okay, cool. And now one more question. This one has to do with what to eat with Laurent-Perrier. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Sally from Danville, and I'm wondering, I love to prepare food and I love champagne, and I'm wondering, what is the best cuisine to be served with champagne?
Well,
I couldn't catch if Sally was from Danville, California.
California. And she wants to know, so is there another Danville out there?
Well, no, there's Denville, New Jersey, which is basically right near where I'm from. So I don't know, maybe I thought maybe it's Denville.
No, Danville, California. And she wants to know, she wants to know in terms of like, does Thai pair best with it? Mexican, Chinese food, French food, obviously, but is there a cuisine that you like?
So, champagne is one of the very, very few essentially pretty much the only large scale kind of wine that is a blend of white and red wines, right? So there's three main grapes in Champagne: Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and another black grape called Meunier. But you won't find much Meunier in Laurent-Perrier. So basically, we're a blend of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So the versatility there, right, you can imagine, is just incredible. So, in our non-vintage and our La Cuvée, those are the predominant grapes. So we have this versatility that matches with so much. The first thing, of course, that I recommend with Champagne is just Champagne on its own, right? You don't need any food with it. And then if you are having I'm not a fantastic cook myself. I love being able to just put out some almonds and some potato chips and some popcorn with our Champagne. And it sounds really almost, like too easy, but those are great pairings. Anything that's salty and things that are fried go really well with Champagne.
Yes.
So that's like a super easy little app course to start out with. But then, you can go from, as I mentioned, our rosé with duck, because it's 100% Pinot Noir. It'll match with things that go with Pinot Noir, and things that are heavy that maybe you want a little acid to cut through that. It's a wonderful pairing with duck and a wonderful pairing with salmon. It's our rosé. The Blanc de Blanc Brut Nature, which again, being 100% Chardonnay and having no sugar, that is an incredibly good wine for shellfish, oysters, and sushi and caviar, right? It's so clean. Like, people drink vodka with caviar because you don't want anything getting into in the way with that. To me, Blanc de Blanc Brut Nature with caviar is extraordinary. It's clean, it's fresh, and you have that saltiness from the caviar that works so well. I was mentioning the white chalk soil of Champagne. That's actually a dried up seabed of the Paris Basin geologically. That literally is tiny little sea organisms from millions of years ago. So seafood and Champagne tends to be a wonderful combination.
Fantastic.
It's so versatile. It's so versatile. The hardest part is, though, I would say, Sally, if you're trying things out, if you open up the bottle to taste while you're cooking, I tend to find that there's kind of nothing left by the time you're done cooking. So that's the challenge of pairing Champagne with food. That's the challenge.
It certainly helps you with your cooking. Maybe your cooking comes out even better.
Absolutely. Absolutely right, Mary. Absolutely right.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes. Michelle, it has just been un plaisir to get to know you and to spend this time chatting about all things bubbly and really getting to know you. This is how fun. And I love your approach. I love that you're helping women in the industry, and all that Laurent-Perrier is doing to further careers for women, to be a more responsible, sustainable partner in the world in wine.
Yeah, ditto to everything Mary Orland said. Just loved the conversation, and I think you're just a breath of fresh air. And Champagne is a special treat, and it is your brand is obviously high quality, and I love that you are also yet very down to earth and approachable, and that's so refreshing and fun for us. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you, and that really is. I'm honored to say that I do feel like I'm a good representative of the house for that. It's not just me. That is who we are at Laurent-Perrier. We are real people. And I want to thank you so much for asking such great questions and such important questions about things that really matter, and for giving me the opportunity to talk about Laurent-Perrier and everything that we're doing that really does matter in the world. So thank you.
Our pleasure.
Well, sip, sip, hooray, Michelle.
Sip, sip, hooray to that, ladies. Cheers
Yes.
to you, and cheers to a continuation of your amazing podcast. Thank you.
Thank you,
Merci,
Michelle.
merci.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Well, Mary Orland, what a force of nature that Michelle DeFeo is. She is so fun, articulate, passionate, and wow, what a terrific representative of Laurent-Perrier and the champagne industry in general. I mean, you talk about reasons to celebrate and why quality is worth it. I just loved everything she had to say, and their wines are just incredibly gorgeous.
They are, Mary Babbitt, and everything that she and Laurent-Perrier are doing to help women rise even higher, and to just let everybody know that yes, champagne is for celebration, but you have to find the little celebrations in every day, not just wait for the holidays or events like graduations or marriages. There's something you can celebrate every day.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we thank you guys for listening and joining us in this conversation. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if you like our show, tell your friends and please share the news about Sip Sip Hooray. We certainly appreciate you listening to us, and we would love you to bring more people into our tent.
And the way to do that is head to our website, sipsiphooray.podcast.com. You will see this episode, and you will see all the places that you can listen, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iTunes. You'll also find all of our previous episodes, which we hope at some point you'll listen to as well. And then you can follow us on social media. We are at Sip Sip Hooray Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. And on Twitter, we are Sip Sip Hooray, the number 1.
Okay, Mary Orlin, I'm going to let you go enjoy the rest of that bubbly.
Yes.
Cheers to you, girl.
Yes, cheers. Sip Sip Hooray.
Sip Sip Hooray.